Rewind Journal, March 4th, 2022. Today, a movie was released in the theaters. One of the most anticipated movies of the year, and it's not even Easter. I myself have seen this picture, and I can't help but ponder the question: had I just watched one of the greatest superhero movies ever made? Or was this just another comic book adaptation, pretending to be something more? Either way, this needs to be discussed. And this is my review. Well, grab your eyeliner and capes, it's time to review 2022's The Batman. DC's newest instalment of the Caped Crusader franchise is directed by Matt Reeves and was written by both Reeves himself and Peter Craig. It stars Robert Pattinson as the Caped Crusader, as well as Zoë Kravitz, Jeffrey Wright, Colin, Farrell, Paul Dano, John Turturro and Andy Serkis, among many other famous faces. Now, I know what you're probably saying, not another Batman movie, and I'll be honest, I was along those lines back when this was first announced, because I do feel like DC has done a lot of Batman oriented stuff over the past few years, and I was feeling the, not oversaturation, but I was starting to feel a little bit of a, you know, we've kind of done everything at this point, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. So I kept an eye out for it, and eventually once they started revealing who was going to be working behind the scenes, Matt Reeves, I was a really big fan of what he did with the Planet of the Apes franchise, and seeing what it was that they were trying to do, I was a lot more curious. Obviously when they started announcing the cast, it wasn't the cast that I might have had in mind, and I think when they announced the people like Robert Pattinson and Colin Farrell and people like that, I wasn't 100% on board with it, and I was still quite curious about what it was that they were planning on doing. Then those trailers came out, and it very quickly became one of my most anticipated movies of the year that it was meant to come out. And unfortunately, it was one of the movies that was affected by the plagues that shall not be named, and unfortunately it was pushed back till 2022. So it's finally out, it's here in cinemas, and we're actually getting to talk about it now. So straight off the bat, it's a lot more slower than previous movies that we have seen before. It's more of a noir-styled detective story, and it's very much, as many people have said, it is one of the darkest movies that they have made to date. You know, because they do seem to be getting darker and darker with each instalment. It was interesting to see what direction that they were going to take with this interpretation of the character, because there's been so many different versions of it. When they announced that they were going to be doing more of a detective-oriented story, I think that was the thing that made me most curious about this movie, because we haven't really seen that in the past. We've seen little glimpses of it in a couple of the Dark Knight movies, as well as, surprisingly enough, Batman and Robin, but we've never really seen it properly done in live action. The most detective oriented stuff that we have seen was in the animated series, and for many people that is the definitive version of Batman. So getting to see this interpretation of the character, getting to see a detective live action Batman movie, that was really exciting, and I think they really pulled it off. So I'm going to start off with obviously the thing that most people are talking about, and that is Robert Pattinson as Batman. I absolutely loved him in this role. There's so many scenes of him in this movie where he is in the costume, like he is in the costume for a good 70-80% of the movie. Like, surprisingly, this movie is nearly 3 hours long, and that is a really impressive feat. Even the MCU don't really do that. They try to keep out the costumes as much as they can and have them sort of balance between the civilian stuff and their superhero stuff. So it was really great getting to see a superhero movie where they actually have him in the costumes throughout most of the film, and he really does have the presence of what you would expect from Batman. Watching him on screen, there wasn't ever a point where it was like, oh, that's just Robert Pattinson, that's the guy from Twilight. I had to get that joke out of the way somewhere. It's not really a joke, but seeing him on screen and just the way that he's just standing, and he's really reserved and he's very quiet, he doesn't really speak a lot throughout the movie, but that to me was who Batman was. And I didn't see Robert Pattinson, I saw Batman. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying, oh, does that mean that you think he's the best version of the character? I think he is one of the better interpretations that we have got. The bit that I and a lot of fans that have noticed are quite split on is his performance as Bruce Wayne. He's not exactly the playboy that most people will have seen, especially with Christian Bale, where they really played that angle up. I think if I was going to compare Batman, I think he's probably the best all-rounder, because he's the only one that really sort of got the contrast right between all three different personalities. They got the Bruce Wayne in the public, Bruce Wayne when he's at home with Alfred on his own, and then the Batman. In that aspect, I don't think Robert Pattinson really did as well as he could have done. I think that might have been intentional, because he is a lot more reclusive and antisocial, and it's not really something that we've never really seen with a Bruce Wayne. I was quite curious to see if they were going to sort of explore that, but as I said, he spends most of his time in the costume, so we don't really get to see an awful lot of his Bruce Wayne. I think the idea for what they were going with is because he seems to be addicted to being Batman in this. He spends most of his time as Batman. He wants to be Batman the whole time. So when he's as Bruce Wayne, he appears to be a bit more Batman-like rather than another person. So I do think it was intentionally done that way. And maybe if they do progress in the future and they do have more adventures with this version of the character, I do think that maybe we will eventually see that personality coming through. As it stands, I think this is a really strong performance, and I think he does an awful lot with just his eyes and just how he's able to convey so many emotions. I'll get into spoilers later on. I'll make sure that I do a little signal or something just to let you know when that's happening. But there's a scene where it's just this connection that he has with someone, and there isn't a word spoken, and it's just so well played that you really do feel what it is he's going through. And I think there's moments like that really sort of solidify him as a genuinely great Batman. When it comes to the supporting cast, I think one of the biggest standouts was Zoë Kravitz as Selina Kyle. Now, they have said that she isn't necessarily Catwoman in this movie, and I can see why they say that, because for all intents and purposes she basically is, and I think what they were trying to do with the adapting a costume as well, I think it does look like a Catwoman that could exist. It is like the black costume, and the way that the mask kind of comes around, it sort of looks like she's got little ears on her head. In terms of performance, I think she is brilliant in the role, and there is really something about her that she feels very different. She feels quite she does bring a more unique sort of personality to this role. We've never really seen a definitive Catwoman in a sense, and I think she is probably one of the closest ones we've had. I think she really does sort of understand who this character is, and we get to see a lot of her, what drives her a bit more, and there's a lot of chemistry between her and Bruce, and I think I buy the relationship between those two a lot more than many other versions that we've seen. So I was really happy with what she was able to do with the role, and I'll probably get into the spoiler territory, so I think maybe I'll just save that for a little bit later. In terms of other real standouts for this, Colin Farrell as the Penguin. I've told people in the past that yes, that's who's playing the Penguin, and I've shown them pictures and they just don't believe it at all. The makeup on him is incredible. You would not recognise him at all. And it isn't just the makeup either. His accent that he has throughout the movie, it is a proper transformation performance. Like, it's so well done, and the performance that he gives, he is a lot more over the top than I think you would expect for a movie like this, but it's a lot more reserved than the Danny DeVito version. A lot of the villains who show up in this are very much like the early days of these characters, and I think they are going to be explored in the TV spin-offs, which are currently in development at the time of recording. So I feel like that's probably where we're going to be seeing Colin Farrell really start to become like the penguin that we all know. But as it stands, I think this is a really good interpretation of the character, and I'm really curious to see what it is that they do with the character from here on. Obviously, the movie's 3 hours long, and there's so much that they are trying to do in this. So there are a few characters who do sort of show up, but you don't really get to see an awful lot of them. John Turturro as Falcone is one of them. I feel like I was kind of surprised how much of the movie actually does play into. I'll get into that in the spoiler section. This is a very different version of what we've seen in Batman Begins, and I think that's like one of the only versions of the character that we've really seen in live action. I'll save that for the spoiler section. Andy Serkis as Alfred, actually a really good choice. I mean, Andy Serkis is one of my favourite actors, so hearing that he was going to be in the movie, of course it's Matt Reeves, I was really curious to see who it was he was going to be playing, and I was kind of on board with him being Alfred. I think that is actually quite a good choice, and I think he is good in the role. I don't think we've actually had a bad Alfred. They do sort of adapt a bit more of like the military style version of the character, where he's the one who sort of trains Bruce up a bit, and similar to Batman, I think they were trying to sort of make him more of his own version of the character rather than just trying to do what the others have done in the past. The only issue is that he's barely in the movie. And the only real scenes that we really get to see of him and Bruce is it's a bit more spoiler oriented. He's barely in the movie. I would have loved to have seen a bit more of him, because I do think him and Robert Pattinson really do have a good connection, and I think the relationship between Alfred and Bruce is definitely a bit more parently in a way, and I think there is something that we haven't really seen before, and I just really like what they were trying to do with Alfred in this one. And then we've got Jeffrey Wright, who most people probably know as the voice of the Watcher now. He's playing Lieutenant Gordon. Again, this is another version that's very different from what we've seen before. Like, he's a lot gruffer than Gary Oldman, but they still managed to capture a lot of who the character is, and I think Jeffrey Wright is a really good choice for the role, and I think I am happy with him being in this movie, because I think he is a brilliant actor, and I think having somebody like him be in such a prominent role as well is really good. I mean, every actor who's in the movie actually does really well. I can't actually think of a single person who was weak in any way. Even like the extras and everyone, they all seem to bring the right level of performance to each role, and I think it really does help bring about the believability of this movie. I think everyone is brilliant in this movie. There's a lot of extra people who do come into. I'll get into a couple other people a bit later on, but obviously I've got to talk about the other big character in this movie, and that is Paul Dano's Riddler. This is a completely different version of the Riddler than we've seen before. Obviously the only other live action versions that we've got were the ones in Gotham and Batman Forever, and obviously they went for a bit more of a cartoony sort of rendition of the character. This is very much a complete reimagining, and I feel like this is definitely a bit more of a shall I say a Nolanized version of the character. He's a lot nastier, he's a lot creepier, he's genuinely quite chilling at times, because he is very realistic, and I think because they used I think it was the Zodiac Killer who they drew a lot of influence from, and it really does help ground him in reality, where it does feel like this is genuinely a character that could exist, and it is quite scary that this could potentially happen. But obviously there are more fantastical elements that do sort of get into a bit later on. That will split people, I think, but in terms of the performance, I think Paul Dano, as soon as they cast him, I was like, yes, That is an absolutely brilliant choice, because he really does have that sort of quality that the Riddler has. But similarly, I think in terms of how much of the movie he's actually in, he doesn't have a lot of screen time, which is such a strange thing to say because the movie's 3 hours. So it does mean that it kind of takes away from maybe seeing a bit more of like Batman and Riddler interacting. I mean, you do sort of see them interact over like phone and things. And obviously, you've seen the trailer, you've seen that they do have an interrogation sequence. That is really good, and I think Paul Dano, he's a brilliant choice for this role. And even like the costume that they have for him, it's odd not seeing like the bowler cap and the cane and all sorts. But I did appreciate the little glasses that he wears, which are actually the exact same ones that Jim Carrey wore in Batman Forever. It is definitely a very drastically different interpretation of this character, and some people probably won't be expecting just how different he is, because like he's a lot more closer to what we might have seen in like the Arkham games, where he's a little bit more sadistic in a way, but there is a reason behind it, and obviously they do go into that in the movie, and that's part of the mystery of this film. It's not the toughest mystery to work out, but there's enough of twists in terms of sort of keep you guessing, so you don't know for 100% certainty what it is that this version of Riddler has planned as his master plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the story. I definitely won't get into spoilers. I've said that many times. What I'm going to be doing in a lot of these videos, especially the big movies that people are looking forward to, I'm going to sort of split things up into like a general review, and then do like a spoiler section where I'll sort of rattle off just a few other random things that I just wanted to mention. It won't be like a breakdown of the entire movie, but it'll just be a few thoughts that I had, or things that I sort of wanted to mention in the main review section. And yeah. So the story for this movie sees Batman in his second year of crime fighting, where he's managed to establish himself as some sort of force to be reckoned with, this terrifying creature of the night. And he encounters a character called the Riddler, who is targeting political figures in Gotham City, and Batman has to try and solve this mystery and try and uncover not only who the Riddler is, but why it is that he's doing all these murders and how his own family ties into it. It seems like a really straightforward story, and for the most part it is, and I think one of the reasons why it's such a long movie is because there are a lot of sequences that are quite drawn out, and it does feel like the story is a lot simpler than it really could have been. I mean, there are a lot of plot elements and twists that they do bring out later on, and it does give you a good idea of why the movie is as long as it is. But yeah, it is pretty straightforward. It is a mystery movie. It is more of a mystery than anything else. There's obviously a lot of the crime elements in there. It's a lot more of a noir thriller, and there's a lot of influences from movies like Seven, which I know is quite a big influence on this movie. There's a lot of different influences that have gone into making this movie, and Seven is one of the prime examples of that. I will happily admit that I have not actually seen Seven at this point in time. I will do it one day, and I will do a proper review for it one day in the future in a rewind review. But from scenes that I have watched and little clips here and there, I do see the influence, and I do see where the inspiration for this interpretation of the movie comes from, and I really do love that that's the kind of story that they were trying to tell, because it does feel a lot more like what Batman should have been. There's also quite a lot of a horror angle to it as well. This is probably the most horror-like Batman movie that we have had. It's not a straight-up horror in the way that they kind of pitched it as, but there are a lot of elements that are very much a horror. Like the serial killer vibe that they have with the Riddler does give off that horror sort of feel to it. And there's a lot of scenes of like Batman just walking down long corridors with a torch, and you know, especially a sequence quite early on, there is definitely a few beats where it's like, this is going to be a bit terrifying. but it's not too bad in terms of a horror movie. I'm not a huge horror movie fan, so I was a bit nervous about going into seeing this one, but I was quite pleasantly surprised with how well they handled it, and I think it wasn't too horrifying, but it was still just enough. Also, I think I do need to mention that there are a lot of people who do seem to be thinking that this is going to be more of an action-based movie in the similar way that the Nolan movies were. It's not an action movie. It's, as I've said, it's a lot more subtler, it's a lot slower, it's more mystery-focused, it's more detective-oriented. So don't expect a big, huge, mad action movie. That being said, there are some action sequences throughout, and they are really well handled. There's a few fight sequences at the Iceberg Lounge that are really well handled. They're shot really nicely, they are choreographed really well. There is a sequence a bit later on in the movie as well, which is proving quite divisive. I personally didn't mind it, but I can see why people would have had problems with it, because it does feel quite different to what had come before it. That being said, there's also probably one of the best Batmobile sequences I've ever seen. I don't really want to spoil the sequence for people who haven't seen it. There's something that they do about this version of the Batmobile that they said that Stephen King's Christine was a big influence on, and that's definitely there. So when you see the Batmobile for the first time, it is a bit of a goosebump moment. It's probably one of the best Batmobile introductions that they've ever done on live action. In terms of the design of the Batmobile as well, I really like how it's kind of blurred previous versions together. It's a bit more of a muscle car, so it's got a bit of an Adam West sort of back to it, and it's such a really well made sequence. And I think if you are a Batman fan and you have been looking forward to seeing a good version of the Batmobile, I think this is definitely going to be one of your favourite sequences in the movie. Also, the movie is quite realistic. There's a lot of practical effects that they try to use throughout the movie, but there are a few special effects sequences here and there, and they are really well done. There's only a couple scenes that I can think of that could have done maybe a tiny bit of tweaking, but honestly, there's barely a moment that you would tell that anything has really sort of been changed. So a lot of the sequences in that were filmed in Liverpool, they do change out the background. They do chroma a lot of the backdrop out, so it looks a bit more like Gotham City. And honestly, unless you live in Liverpool or Glasgow or London or wherever it is that they filmed the movie, you probably will notice it just a little bit more, but if you don't, you won't notice it at all. But yeah, a lot of the effects, they are done really well, and I think it was one of the wiser decisions to have it be a bit more practical, because it is a lot more of a realistic, grounded movie, so it does make sense that they would go in a more realistic route. I've mentioned the length of the movie, and it is just shy of 3 hours long, and that is going to put people off. There are times where you can feel it, like it doesn't drag at all, but there are sequences where it's just like, can you just sort of get moving? But I found it really, really gripping, and it's one of those films that you just get absorbed into it. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It's so well made that you really don't care that it's 3 hours long. But I can see why there are going to be a few people who aren't going to be happy with that, and even though somebody who said that they dozed off as well, so that's not great. For me personally, I found it really engaging. I think it is one of those movies that I can quite easily sit through, and it didn't bother me how long it was. One thing I will say though is that if you are expecting maybe like a post-credit scene, there's no spoilers or anything. There isn't one at the end. There is like a little tag that's just got like a little a website link that you can go on, but that's really it. There's nothing in there, so if you do need to get going a bit early, then don't feel you have to. I mean, you will be missing out on a bit of the music, but you know. In terms of the music, the score for this movie is done by Michael Giacchino, who is one of my favourite composers, so when I heard that he was going to be doing this movie, I was really excited to see what he was going to do with the film. From his work on things like the Planet of the Apes movies and Jurassic World and a load of the Pixar movies, as well as The Incredibles and Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, I was curious to see what it was that he was going to do with this interpretation of Batman. This is a really darker, more moody, tense soundtrack that he brings to it. It really does amplify the tone of this film. It's very dramatic, and it really does amplify a lot of the horror elements as well, because honestly, just hearing the soundtrack on its own, it sounds like it could quite easily fit in like a slasher movie, but it really does suit this film. It really does complement it in a way that some soundtracks don't. It's subtle enough that you don't notice it too much. It doesn't overpower what's going on screen, but it's memorable. You do remember that theme. You do remember the themes for each of the characters, and you will kind of have it drugged into you over the 3 hours. But if you've watched the trailers, you will have heard the main theme by now. And I think it is one of the best themes that Batman has had. I really liked it. I really loved the score. I really loved what Michael Giacchino did with it, and I was just really happy with how it played into the movie. Also, the way that they throughout the marketing, there was a big focus on Nirvana's Something in the Way, and I was wondering if they were actually going to include it in the movie, because that does seem to be something that a lot of big Hollywood movies tend to be doing now, where we do tend to associate a song with a film when it's used in a trailer. We did associate that movie with that song, and it just made sense that we would have that song actually feature in the movie. So they do have it in the film, and it does work, it does fit, and I really liked where it is that they placed it. I also liked how it does sort of tie into the story and who the character is. In terms of the look of the movie, I think this is one of the most gorgeous looking movies. I mean, the cinematographer for the film was Greg Fraser, who has worked on things like Dune and a lot of other big projects as well. I think he works on Mandalorian as well. It is absolutely stunning looking movie. There, it looks like it could be a graphic novel. There are a lot of panels, especially like with the sequence that they've shown in the trailer of him coming out of the Batmobile. It does look like it could be straight out of a graphic novel. With that, they also do have the sort of narration that goes through it as well. It's not throughout the movie. It's quite sparsely used. It's something that does give the movie a slightly distinct sort of feel, so it separates it from a lot of the ones that we've had in the past. But it works really well. In terms of the inspiration that they've used for a lot of this movie, there's a lot of things from like previous versions of Batman. So you've got a little bit of the Arkham series, a little bit of the animated series. There's definitely influences from the Nolan trilogy as well, but then there's a lot of other ones as well, like Seven and Christine and even Saw at a couple of points. But the inspirations are well founded, because they do fit this interpretation of Batman. They do fit there's a lot of things that they do try to do with Batman over the many different films. So using a lot of these different films as influence, it does help separate it from a lot of them, but it also sort of keeps it familiar enough that long-time Batman fans should be happy with it. So before I get into the spoilers, I'll just give an overall view as well as my rating for the film. Overall, I think if you're a Batman fan, this is a must-see movie. I think if you're a film fan, this is going to be something that you should check out. It's a really well made, really gorgeous looking sound, everything about it. It is incredibly well made. It is one of the best Batman movies that we have had since The Dark Knight. Honestly, I can't recommend it enough. It is a brilliant movie. That being said, I do think that there are going to be elements of it that probably won't resonate too well with people. I think there are going to be some people who will find it a little long and a little dull. I don't blame you if you do find it that way. That's more than fine. It's not going to be to everyone's taste. For me, I absolutely loved it, and my rating for this movie will be 9 out of 10. I don't do half stars here. So I'm going to start getting into the spoiler territory now. So if you haven't seen the movie, this is the point to jump off, but if you have seen the movie or you haven't and you don't care, then stick around because we're about to start going into some spoiler talk. So I'm going to start off with the costume that they've got for this new version of Batman. I think when they first announced it, it was there's quite an interesting reaction when they first revealed it, because they had that little teaser trailer of just him in the costume in like the red light, and they do sort of explain why there is a red light in pretty much all of the marketing, and it's all because of the Iceberg Lounge. So just thought it was a nice little thing that they carried on through. But yeah, with the costume, I'd like that it is a lot more armorified. I do think this is definitely one of the better representations of the Batman costume. I think I love what they did with the cowl, because you can see like all the stitching and sewing lines all along like the nose line, up along the ears. It does really look really nice, and I like a few of the little tricks that it has, like the wingsuit that he's got, that sort of makes sense why, like rather than like the big extended wings that he normally has. You know, I would like to see that one day, but I think obviously they are going a bit more of a realistic direction. It does make sense that that's what they would do. And in terms of the logo on his chest, a lot of people were sort of theorising that what it was that it could be, with some saying that it was supposed to like made from the gun that killed his parents, and why was that even a theory? But it does turn out that it is something. It is actually like a tactical knife in a way. He does use it a couple of times throughout the movie, and it is a nice surprise seeing the bat symbol actually being used for something rather than just like a thing on his chest. It was just really nice seeing something different that we haven't really seen before. Also, I really loved the tech that he's got as well, because it is quite grounded, but it's pushing things just enough that it's still believable, but it's just edging towards more of a science fiction sort of realm. And the way that he's got these special contact lenses that he is able to record everything. And I love that sort of gives like a bit of an explanation as to why he's so quiet and why he sort of like stands back and he's just looks around, you know. And I like that little twist on the character. But I mentioned about Robert Pattinson having a lot of moments where it's just he's just using his eyes to communicate things, and one of the scenes that I was referring to is quite early on after the Riddler's first victim, and there's a moment where he's going past the crime scene and he sees the kid of the victim, and it's just a moment between the two of them where they just look at each other, and it's just, there's so much going on in that scene. It's so well executed, and the way that you don't need exposition, you don't need any dialogue. I mean, we've seen Batman's origin story so many times, even the Joker movie couldn't resist doing it again. So having that moment just sort of establishing that yes, these events have happened, but not letting us know and just letting us fill in the blanks and just letting us connect with this version and helping us understand what he's going through and how much this still is affecting him to this day. And it was just a really nice moment. I love how that is used throughout the movie as well. I do feel like the kid might sort of know who Bruce is, but obviously they don't go there. But I do like how they do bring it around towards the end, with the kid being the one that Batman ultimately helps when the rally's been flooded. And honestly, I found that a little touching. I loved how that built up over time, and that just really worked well for me. And speaking of the end, I think with the way that they were trying to go with the way that the Riddler was kind of inspiring people to take up the mantle in a way and have a gang of them all joining in on what he was doing, I do like that is something that they do explore in this, and I like seeing this side of Batman's influence on Gotham City, because they do kind of explore it a little bit in The Dark Knight, where, you know, he's where just after the Joker's escaped from prison, he's got that moment where he's saying that he was meant to inspire people to be good and not inspire madness. This is a good core part of the movie, and it shows a different side of Batman that we've never really seen before. I did like how they handled that moment where you see one of the Riddler's goons on the ground and he repeats what Batman said earlier on in the movie, "I'm vengeance." It really does hit you just what an effect Batman is actually having on the city. So I really liked that this is the direction that the story was going in, and seeing how Batman's now gone from a character who is just inspiring fear in people into somebody who is hopefully going to start bringing hope. I remember seeing a little bit of the marketing and wondering if they were going to have like maybe multiple Riddlers, like maybe the one that you see getting arrested was going to be the first one, and then it turns out that there's another one and there's going to be like a whole group of Riddlers all conspiring together, which wasn't too wrong, but I was still happy that it was just like the singular Riddler. But then there's also a lot of little references to other villains and things that are going to be happening in the future. There's a really lovely shout out to Hush, who for a little while I was kind of convinced that this version of Riddler was based on. In the marketing they showed one of the politicians getting sellotape all around his head, and I kind of assumed that maybe what the Riddler was doing was actually what Hush does, and trying to recreate Bruce Wayne's face. I mean, they did adapt into an animated movie in I can't remember what year it was, and I was really disappointed with how they handled that, because they did do a very similar thing to what I thought they were going to do with this film, but I felt this one earned it a little bit more, because that was what the mystery was all about rather than what the animated movie was about, and I just couldn't get on board with what that film was trying to do. And obviously towards the end of the film as well, we've got the Riddler now in Arkham, and there is an unnamed Arkham inmate who is just next door, and it is very obvious who he's meant to be. If you're following the movie during the marketing, you will have seen a lot of people suspecting who Barry Keoghan was supposed to be. You know, is the actor who played Druid from Eternals, and a lot of people were wondering who that character was supposed to be, and it is very obvious that he is meant to be the Robert Pattinson's version of Joker. A lot of those fan theories about Joaquin Phoenix being a part of this universe is wrong, which I'm happy with, because I feel like that is very much a standalone movie. I'm not happy that they've announced that they are going to be doing a sequel to it, because I feel that sort of lessens what that movie is about. It's not my favourite version of the Joker, it's not my favourite origin story of the Joker, but it is a very well made movie, and I just don't think that it should have a follow on. I'm glad that this version is completely separate. I'm hoping that he isn't going to be the villain of the next movie. Maybe if the Arkham series goes ahead, then maybe it'd make more sense for him to be a presence throughout that. But in terms of where I think the next movie should go, I do feel like the villains who I wanted to see in this movie should be the villains of the next one, and they are the Court of Owls. I was very curious to see why the Riddler was going after all these politicians and why he was going after all these people in charge, and my theory was that he knew about the court and he was going after members and he was trying to get rid of them all, and that's how he was going to cure the city. But no, that's not his plan. I was a little disappointed that that's not what we got, but it could happen, it could potentially go in that direction, and I'm happy that we are getting the Gotham Knights video game, and that's going to have the Court of Owls as the central villain, so it's really nice that they are starting to get recognised a lot more within different media. Now, I've talked a lot about the marketing for this movie, and having now seen the film, I actually think that they maybe showed a little bit too much in the trailers. I actually wouldn't have shown as much as they did. So there's definitely sequences where they did not need to show. You know, even though they were definitely like the money shots of like Batman getting out of the Batmobile and things like that, but that's the end of that sequence. I don't know why they showed that bit, and even just like the Riddler getting caught and the interrogation scene, which again, why did they show it? And I really don't understand why that's what they were trying to do. I mean, obviously they're trying to sort of make this movie look a lot more action-packed than it is. And that's kind of false advertising in a way, because it's not an action-packed movie, it is a slower, crime-driven detective movie. That was a little bit frustrating to see, because I knew how a lot of this was going to unfold, but it didn't really sort of impact too much on my enjoyment of it. I was more than happy with seeing how it all played out. And that being said, it was a little bit more unpredictable than I thought it was going to be. I mean, it does sort of play into your expectations enough that it can sort of trick you into thinking that the movie's going to be about a certain something, and then it kind of tails off into something else. With the story with Falcone, for instance, that I wasn't expecting him to be as big a part of this as he was, because a good chunk of the movie actually revolves around him and his connection to the Waynes, and this is definitely a version of the Waynes that we've never really seen before. I mean, Joker kind of went there a little bit with Thomas Wayne not exactly being like the nice guy that everyone normally associates the character with, and I really liked how they portrayed that with Bruce and the way that he sort of reacts to it. And also think that it was quite an interesting idea having Martha Wayne also be a psychiatric patient as well. I just think that was a really nice idea, because we've never seen much about these characters, and I think it also really nicely references the Flashpoint storyline as well, where Thomas Wayne became Batman and Martha became that version of the Joker. So I just really liked how they were able to sort of reference that and really tie it into this story in a way that was believable, and sort of it shocks you enough that it is a really quite surprising turn of events. And also with the Falcone story, I was quite surprised about having him be Selina's father, which I think is quite an interesting twist on the story. And again, it is unexpected, and you aren't really thinking that the movie is going to go in that direction. You expect the movie to be completely about the Riddler, and you expect them to be about Batman trying to take on the Riddler, and that be the central focus of the story. But the Riddler's off screen for a long time. It's definitely an interesting idea for them to do, because especially with how it all wraps up, it does feel like that should be the end of the movie. Obviously it keeps going, and you get the big third act sequence, which I'll get onto in a little bit. But with the Falcone story, there is definitely an element of a bit of a coincidence, because the bring him into the light bit, it doesn't completely add up, because there are moments where Falcone is out in the open, but I wonder if the sequence like during the funeral where Falcone actually is out in the open, whether the bomb that's sent to the funeral, I wonder if that was meant for him. So maybe it isn't necessarily a plot hole. I don't know, I can't remember what order it was in, whether the bring him into the light was earlier on or whether that was later. It would definitely make sense if it was later, because at least that was sort of fixed that in a way. And also Peter Skarsgård, I think a lot of people were expecting him to be somebody quite significant, but I found it quite surprising that he's actually the person who is sent to the funeral as the bomb. That sequence is really well done. It's so intense, and again, trailer kind of spoiled this. You know that it's going to go off, but I think they really do sort of play it up in a way that it is still shocking. It is still quite unexpected how it all plays out. I also mentioned that there is a little bit of a Saw influence in this movie, which kind of surprised me a little bit, because I had heard that there were elements that were similar to those movies, and I was a little bit worried about what there was, because they're movies that I just won't go near. So I was kind of curious to see what it was that they were influencing, what the influence was going to be, and it's more the contraptions and traps that the Riddler uses throughout the movie that the biggest influences are, like the collar that Peter Sarsgaard's character's wearing with the bomb attached to it, and a pretty disturbing one with a woman who was kidnapped, and you've got like this big box around them. It's like this big maze, and then you see all these rats in like little compartments, and this is disturbing, and I think it is warranted that there are people who are saying that this does push the boundaries of what a PG-13 rating is. And for us, the movie is rated a 15. I don't know if it is a 15. I think that is personally a judgment call. I think The Dark Knight is a far more intense movie, but I can definitely see why people will find this one disturbing. It's left off screen, so you don't see anything too graphic or anything like that. I don't think it is R-rated. I don't think it is too bad. I mean, it's, for us in the UK, it's the same age rating as the Suicide Squad. Now that to me is a 15. That to me isn't even a 15. That is an 18. That is much more extreme than it needed to be. It's a fantastic movie. The Batman for me sort of felt like it was a really pushy 12A in a way. For parents, if you are considering letting a younger kids watch this movie, I think it might be a bit too much for them. I mean, it really depends on the kid really. I think if they played like the Arkham games and things like that, which they more than likely have if they're a big Batman fan, they might be alright with it, so it's completely down to you guys. The thing that I kept seeing with a lot of the other reviews that were saying that this is a humourless movie, and it was a similar thing that I kept seeing with the Dark Knight trilogy, and it's not a humorless film at all. There are elements of humour in here that just sort of line it up just a little bit. It's not a full-on comedy, but there's just enough moments of levity that just sort of make you just have a little bit of a breather, because it is very dark. It is a very tense movie at times, so it is nice to have like little moments of levity, and some of those come from the Riddler, some of them come from the Penguin. No Ratalada. The nice sort of balance enough with that, so it wasn't too over the top dark, but the comedy doesn't overshadow that in a way. It doesn't take you out of the movie. I've also got a comment on the way that they handle Gotham in this one. This feels like the best version of Gotham that we've ever got. It's quite grimy, but it's quite modern. It's quite new. There's a lot of the Gotham TV series influence in here, with the way that you can't quite tell what year it's meant to be. It is really well done. I think it is one of the most well realised versions of Gotham that we've ever seen, and also the way that they use that for like the opening sequence, which unanimously many Batman fans are saying is one of the best Batman scenes ever put to screen. Having him narrating over the bat signal going off and seeing the way that the criminals are reacting, just seeing the bat signal and looking over to the shadows and the way that the camera's slowly panning in, and you think he's there, but he isn't, and it's just the criminals, just the minds are going into overdrive and the fear's taking over them, and you see the influence that Batman has had on them. As I said, with the way that Batman starts off as this horrifying creature early on, with the way that even the person that he saves from that gang, the Skull Gang, whatever they're called, even he's terrified of him. And again, there's another thing that they did address in this movie that they have kind of done in the past, but they haven't really done to this extent in a way. That's like having him work alongside the police, and there's a lot of tension between them because they aren't quite sure whether to trust him or not. Like they don't quite want him on crime scenes, and they tell him to go away, but Gordon sticks up for him and brings him on. And I just really liked having those kind of scenes, because we've never really seen that in a live action movie before. And also loved that sequence when he's actually in the GCPD building, and one of the cops tries grabbing onto the mask and pulling it off, and Batman just fights him off. And I just really love what they were trying to do with the tension between him and the police, because like the only time that we've really seen this done to this extent is in The Dark Knight Rises, where they're convinced that he's a killer and they want him. And also there's this is the second year Batman, this is year 2 of Batman crime fighting, so there's a lot of things that he hasn't done yet. So seeing the, you know, he is definitely getting to a point where he could be the world's greatest detective, where they are starting to sort of push him towards like that character that we are more familiar with. But I did like the scene where he's on top of the GCPD and he's got to jump off, and he does freak out a little bit when he's standing on the side of it, and he's just like, oh, before he dives off. It's just really cool getting to see little bits like that, and you know, seeing him landing ungracefully. It's really great. However, there is one sequence that I think a lot of people are quite split on, and that is the rally sequence and kind of the third act, just after like the Riddler's being captured. I don't mind the sequence because it is good seeing this Batman getting a bit more action oriented, because we don't really get to see a lot of that. We see little glimpses of it early on with like him taking on like the gangs and things like that, and that absolutely amazing corridor sequence. But yeah, we don't really get to see like a really action packed version of Batman, so it was really nice seeing that kind of brought out a little bit more. In terms of the third act for this movie, I think, yeah, there are definitely issues with this, which is why I gave it a 9 out of 10. It does feel a little bit tacked on. It does feel like this might not necessarily be exactly what was going to happen in like original versions of the script. I don't know how different the movie is from what the original vision was, but it does feel like this was added on extra, because the movie does kind of come to an end, and then there's all this extra stuff, and you know, it really depends on how you feel about it. It didn't bother me too much, and I did like how it was all resolved and how it did tie into events from earlier, like with the kids and things like that, and seeing how Batman needs to change how he's perceived to the public, like when he's carrying that woman down the steps, and she grabs hold of his arm, and he's just comforting her, and it's really nice to see this version of Batman, because I can't think of a Batman like that. You know, you've seen little bits of that in the animated series and things like that, but I can't think of a movie where they've really delved into that before. You know, you've seen glimpses of it. I think they did do a little bit in Batman v Superman, just a little bit in that movie, and it was just really great how that did unfold, and the way that it does build up into this moment. And I also have to say that there is a lot of people who are convinced that Batman uses a form of venom to get him to spring back up after he's been knocked out. I don't think it's venom, I think it's just adrenaline. It would make more sense, especially in this very realistic world that they've established, so I think that's more than likely what it is. And you know, if you've seen Kick-Ass 2, it's not the greatest movie, but they do have a sequence that is very similar to that, so I think that's what it actually is. So that's all I've really got to say for this. Honestly, I absolutely loved this movie. I think it is definitely one of the better Batman adaptations that we've had. It is definitely one of the better DC movies that we've had in recent years. I'm really looking forward to seeing where it is that they go forward from here. I am hoping that there isn't too much Batman content in the future, because as I said at the beginning of this, I am definitely feeling a Batman saturation, because I feel like he is a character who is used again and again and again and again and again. He is used so much. I mean, I know a lot of people are saying that Spider-Man's being used quite a lot as well, and nobody's complaining about that, but the difference between Batman with Warner Bros. And Spider-Man with Sony and Marvel is that there aren't as many animated projects. That's the thing that sort of pushes Batman into more oversaturation than anything else, because there's so much Batman content out there, and there's such a push on this one character, when DC has so many incredible characters that they could be doing stuff with. If you're seeing this in the future, then I hope that DC is looking a lot brighter. For the past few years they have been a bit hit and miss. I think from the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and now the Batman, I think they have started to find a stride and find a unique enough voice so that they're able to make more of their own kind of comic book oriented superhero movies compared to Marvel. I'm really looking forward to seeing what it is that they have coming up. So with regards to the Batman, let me know what you thought about it. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you find it too long? Did you find it boring? Let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Would you recommend it to somebody? Please help subscribe to this channel. We've only really just got started, so I'd really appreciate all the help I can get. If you have any suggestions for any movies that you'd like me to have a look at in the future, whether they're I kind of want to look more at older movies. I'm going to do a few newer ones, but they're really going to be ones that I'm more looking forward to. So if you're going to suggest any movies, I would say do older things. You know, I'm not really too fussed on how old they are. They could be from last year. They could be from the 70s or 80s. It doesn't matter. Whatever the recommendation is, honestly, I'd appreciate any of them. But yeah, keep an eye out for any new content in the future. Thanks so much for watching if you've stayed this far. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.